And I told the story about Ulster Scots, but there was a guy there, an Irish speaker, and he said, that's an Irish story. And I've subsequently discovered it's told in a number of areas where there's a language conflict. There was a guy walking down the hills of the Antrim Plateau, and he passed a burn, and there was a dead sheep lying in the burn, rotten. It had been there for a few days. Anyway, we walked on down the hill, on down the side of the burn, and there was a beautifully dressed guy there, just bending down, with his hand into the water, and he scooped it up, and the boy ran over to him, and he says, "Hey, buddy, didn't be drinking out of the on burn, that a dead beast further back on up there, it'll not do you any good." And the fellow looked at him, and he says, "Look," he said, "I don't understand that lingo. Could you not speak in proper English and say what you want to say?" And the fellow says, "Certainly," he says, "if you use both your hands, you'll get a lot more into your mouth," he says. There's a lot of stories told up in my part of County Antrim about the airmen, the Canadian and American airmen who were stationed in Lochgiel and the areas around, surrounding areas of Ballymoney. And there's one particular tale told. They were based in Lissanur Castle, which is the home of the Mackey family, up near Lochgiel. And actually, it encompasses the loch that is Lochgiel. And during the Second World War, as none of you will remember, the pubs closed at 8 o'clock to help with the war effort. Unfortunately, the soldiers didn't get their furlough until 9 o'clock. So they jumped in their jeep and they flailed round to the local pub in Lochgiel, which was called the Pound. And they started banging on the window and banging on the doors. And eventually an upstairs window opened. And a wee woman looked out in her nightcap and she says, "Gone away, boys. This is after ours." And the American soldiers said, "Ma'am, we're not after hers. We're after whiskey." I'm sure that's a true story. They tell the tale of another American tourist who was doing a tour of the Glens, and he pulled in at a hostelry, a hotel, a restaurant, whatever, and the waitress came up and been sitting a wee while, and the waitress came up and said, "What would you like for your lunch, sir?" "Oh," he said, "I'll have a bowl of that horse soup." The waitress looked at him and said, "Horse soup? We don't have horse soup in the menu." And he said, "That guy at the next table asked for mare soup, and you brought him a bowl of it straight away." So I want the same meal. I will also, there's obviously a lot of competition between languages, and everybody loves their own language. And there's a wee story they tell. I'm going to tell you about an Englishman, a Frenchman, and a German. And they were discussing language. And the Englishman said, "Oh my goodness, English is the language of poetry and music. And does not the word butterfly perfectly capture how the butterfly flutters through the air? The very beauty of its sound." "Ah, rubbish," said the Frenchman. "French is the language of love and beauty. Papillon conjures the airy allure of the butterfly. You blow a kiss with the word virtually." And the German said, "And what is wrong with Schmetterling?" Which is the not very nice version of butterfly. I promise you a wee bit of poetry. I'll do the Marshall one first. Marshall, sure many of you may know what I always knew as Drumlister, which is properly entitled Me and Me Da. Very popular. A very interesting character, Marshall. Studied at the University of Galway, Presbyterian minister. Very committed Orange man. Very committed Be Special. And his living was in the back hills of Omagh. And he was absolutely fascinated with the courting rituals and the language and linguistics that the people around the back hills of Omagh used. And that's essentially the story of me and my dad. It's how my dad messed up my love life because he was very demanding of the girls that I came. This is a similar poem, not quite so well known, but maybe known to some of you. It's called Sarah Ann. And the narrator is basically telling how he had a crack at courting Sarah Ann, and it didn't go well, but he bitterly regrets it, and, well, you'll hear from the poem what he's intending to do. Sarah Ann by W.F. Marshall. I'll change my way of going, for my head is getting grey. I'm tormented washing dishes and making drops of tea. The kitchen's like a midden, and the parlour's like a sty, and they're half a foot of clabber in the street out by. I'll go down again the morrow and make Keely to the cross, for I'll have to get a woman, or the place will go to loss. I fathered all the cattle, and there's nothing after that but clocking round the ashes with an old tom cat. My very ears is buzzing for the time I light the lamp, and the place is like a graveyard, bar the mare would gie a stamp. So often I be thinking and contriving for a plan of how to make a match again with Robert's Sarah Ann. I used to mat with Roberts on a Sunday after prayers. Sarah Ann would fetch the tippet to the parlour up the stairs. And once a week for certain I'd be chopping at the door, and there wasn't one would open it but her, you may be sure. And then, for all was going well, I got a neighbour man and took him down to speak for me and axe for Sarah Ann. Did you ever know wee Robert? Well, he's nothing but a wart, a near begone old devil with a wee black heart, a crooked crabbit creature that be's neither well nor sick, girning in the chimney corner or going hopping on a stick. Sure, you mind the girl for hiring that went shouting through the fair, I wandered in wee Roberts, I can summer anywhere. But all the same, wee Robert is a shop and a farm of land. You'd think he'd do it decent when it come to Sarah Ann. She bid me axe 100 and we worked him up and down. But Della hated gear but a cow and 20 pun. I pushed for 20 mare for buy to help to build a byre, but you might as well be talking to the stain behind the fire. So I says to John, my neighbour, sure, we're only losing time. Just let him keep his moily. I can do without her prime. Just let him keep his daughter, the hungry looking near. There's just as chancy women in the countryside as her. Man, he let a big trevally and he sent us baith, you know. But Sarah busted crying, for she seen wee man till go. Aye, she fell to the crying, for you know she isn't young. She's nearly past her market, but she's civil with her tongue. That's half a year or thereaways, and I'm here sitting yet. I'll change my way of going, and I'll do it while I'm fit. She's a snug wheel-daying woman, nae better in Tyrone, and down I'll go the morrow, for I'm far too long me lone. The night the one is rising, and it's coming on to sleet, it's spitting down the chimney on the greasy get me feet. It's whistling at the window, and it's roaring round the barn. There'll be piles of snow the morrow on Mariner Machalacarn. But I'm for tackling Sarah Ann, no matter if there's snow, as everywhere she bound. When the morrow comes, I'll go. Now that was W.F. Marshall. I want to do one here now by a guy called John Clifford, if I can find it. John Clifford is a real story. John was an ignorant farm labourer who laboured on a farm back in the 1930s. He would have been pretty much in his teens, I would say, up his teens a bit. And a film crew arrived along the coast road where he was working in the field. And they were filming a film called The Luck of the Irish, and I think you can actually still see that film. If you speak to somebody nice at the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, I think they have an archive copy of it there. It's not available on DVD or anything like that. But the director took a sort of a shine to Clifford, and he had a non-speaking part. The camera must have loved him because he was quickly upgraded to a speaking part. And when they finished shooting the movie, the director said, "Look, kid, you've got a real talent for acting. forget this farm life. Get yourself over to London with me, and I'll get you a couple of auditions, and I think you'll make a living as an actor. Which is precisely what he did do. And his son has shown me the lovely postcards and Christmas cards from Laurence Olivier, from Richard Todd, from a whole range of screen and stage stars of the London stage and the London screen. He had quiet times, and he did tell the story, not to me, but he told it to the other people, of how he did a bit of gardening when he was over there, when he was resting, I think is the technical term. And in order to facilitate his gardening work, he went into a local hardware shop and said, "Look, could I have a grape?" And the fella said to him, "No, a grape?" He says, "You want the greengrocer's 3 doors up?" He says, No, not a grape. It's a he said, a garden fork. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ulster Scots expression. He's a lovely fella, a nicer fella you couldn't stick a grape in. No, you haven't come across that one. It's a backhanded compliment. Anyway, Clifford had a fine career in England. Eventually, he felt the call of home and he came home here. He wrote plays, he acted in plays, he's did a lot of work for the BBC. He founded the Larne Folklore Society, which started to gather together a lot of the stories and tales around Larne and Glenarm and that whole sort of area up there. He's dead now. He's dead quite a number of years, and his stuff is there, and I'm still to this day trying to interest some of the people in Mr. Clifford's poetry. Now he's got a fabulous one which is very long called The Dealer's Wake, which is very long, but it's very much in the sort of Tam O'Shanter mold. Tells the story of Rab the dealer, Rab McBride, and he dies, but he makes great provision among his wife and family for plenty of drink to be had at his wake. And the poem tells the story of the dealer's wake, and it's a Rabelaisian poem with a lot of very rough edges in it. The one I'm going to read here is one called Larne Hiring Fair. There was a reference there in the wee bit of Marshall's poem to hiring fairs. Essentially, young people were hired twice a year, and they hired themselves at fairs, and they were hired for 6 months, and you get a shilling when you get hired, or sixpence when you get hired, and you get the rest of the money at the end of your stint. And this is it was a hard life. I had an uncle who was a hireling, and he was hired for £5 a year. It's not a lot of money. Anyway, this is called Larne Hiring Fair, and obviously Larne Hiring Fair at some stage must have been a very popular destination for young people looking for work. The corn is stacked, the prit is dug, the cattle housed and eaten snug. November's breath is in the air, and brings since mair Larne's Hiring Fair. For every farm for miles around, the lads and lassies mak the tune, with shiny boots and shiny faces, they seek mair wages and fresh places. The past 6 months they've worked like mad for masters, middling, good or bad. Some well-fed, happy and respected, but other creatures starved, neglected. Yet on this happy day o' cheer, they soon forget the past half year, and flock in droves for good or ill, to Cross Street near the Larne Fair Hill. And hopeful there they tak their stand, each servant lass and servant man, to seek a job and better pay, for 6 lang months renewed till May. Their servant men frae Killyglen that hasna shaved since Lord knows when, and lank rab-baned Mount Hill toughs and gangs of big Kilwater ruchs. They come frae Ballinure and Strain, frae down the shore, aye, and the braid, Glenoo, Raloo, and Island Magee, frae Facedown, Macaraban, Rishi. Dressed up in their Sunday suits, they've creased their hair and blacked their boots, and tent for yints to cut a dash, and buy some fun wi' well-earned cash. There's watches going for 3 and 6, there's corkscrew knives and walking sticks, drinks and apples, nuts, yellow man, all to buy wi' cash in hand. That's where you'll find the servant girls afore they go in search of earls, or maybe printed on their hands as some rich, handsome, dark young man. This is their day, their faces show it. They're brave, weel looking, and man, they know it. and mony a mites was made this day as clinched in kirk afore next May. These sonsy decent well-wrought lasses, though a wee bit blate, are no such asses, but show ambition, pride and zeal, and do their best to marry well. With some mysterious seventh sense, the farmer knows with half a glance that this young lass dressed up to kill has never wrought in town or mill, but knows the way to milk a coo, to feed a calf or stoke a sow. At threshing time could gie a hand fork hair corn wi' ony man. He sidles up. I suppose to see your hair and I am, says she. They bargain, argue, chap, divide, till lang at last the earls is paid. Yet ploughmen are in big demand to Cout Cairn Castle's heavy land. They'll get their keep and £10 clear. And that's not bad for half a year. And then there's use for handy chaps. See, get it big in dikes and slaps, can milk a coo or feed a pig, can swing a scythe or set a rig. They'll clean the horses, plait their manes, and gie a hand at mine and wains. Such chaps as these at this Larn fair can get 6 guineas, less or more. Of course, there's other thaveless beings, soft, harmless, feckless droits, the lanes. They're happy hoking in a shuk, or dunging byres, or something rough. They get a bed, a bit to eat, a dud of clays, clogs to their feet, an odd half crown frae time to time, and this arrangement works out fine. You'd nearly think some unwrit law provided places for them all, the way they fitted in so well like cogs on some great naked wheel. And as the afternoon descends, the fun begins, the hiring ends. They're all fixed up for 6 months more, but still hae time and cash to spare. They're with the happy appetites, gut in search of tune delights, for 10 buns and pig's feet broth, or pints of porter slathered in froth. The farmers slowly trickle home and leave the boys and girls alone, to spend an hour or twa together, making trysts with one another. These golden hours, how soon they flee, yet what great happiness they gie, convoying some young lass and then a cuddle at a loning end. How perfect end a better day. I've only one thing more to say. It's this I'm no ashamed to tell. I sipped them simple joys myself. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read a wee bit of prose. And this is a wee bit of prose that I wrote. And I got quite a good feedback about it. People liked it. It was the first... Well, it's from a book, a collection of columns that I wrote for the Ulster Scot newspaper, and this one's called Simply the Best. This was written in the immediate aftermath of George Best's untimely demise. It's an attempt to celebrate his colourful life, to reflect on the impact he had on so many of our lives, and the joy he brought to so many men and women throughout the world, particularly those of us who shared a birthplace with him. He was an original, made in Ulster, but he bestrode the world. Of course, he was the Belfast boy, but he was appreciated and loved all o'er the world. George was yin our ain, and he'll be gaily missed. There's been a lot of words writ and spoke about the boy, but none writ in our ain wee tongue, till now. He was a very decent body with nae back doors. That means he was a good man without devious motives. A wee bit of a druth, I'll grant you, but there's nae shortage of them that takes a drop in our ain wee country. The pitches he played on were slunky and wat. You might call them a slurry. That's a wet mess. But he skated o'er the ground like a ballet dancer, with defenders in his wake like a pack of grulches. That's slow, awkward, and overweight people, if you were paying attention during the insults under letter G. George didn't fitter about, because if he had them defenders he took such joy in humiliating, would have given him a dunt that he wouldn't forget in a hurry. But they couldn't catch the how of him, thank goodness. George made them look like they had nae footballing abilities or skills whatsoever. resembling Nathan so much as a pack of old women with a stray arse. People liked him. People even loved him, even though they had his fair share of critics. Nyaffs and nyers and yittering at him that bad, it would gie you the nyerps. That translates as small, insignificant persons, objectionable, niggling little people, complaining non-stop in a peevish manner to the extent that it would make you fretful, exasperate you, or get on your nerves. To those critics, I would say they know as much about football as my arse knows about snake shooting, which is not very much. And he was fond of the lassies, married twice to strikingly beautiful women, of whom it could not be said you wouldn't marry her if the sovereigns was hanging for her. Rather, they were the sort of blondes that would make a bishop kick a hole in a stained glass window, as Raymond Chandler so eloquently put it. But there was a brave bit of curtain as well as the marrying. It's no a crime, yet. And some folk, I think, were mair a wee bit jealous of our George. We will mind him for his football, for his film star good looks, the good memories he gin us, the way he made us all proud. I mind standing in a lay-by somewhere in the mountains between Italy and France back in the 1990s and meeting a trio of Argentinians who spoke no English, never mind Ulster Scots. And I had, and continue to have to this day, no Spanish or very little Spanish. Buenos dias, I think is about the height of it. I told them as best I could, using sign language and other methodologies, that I came from Belfast. Okay, that's not quite strictly true, but I was fairly certain they had never heard of Dunloy. And they immediately said George Best, even though his peak had been many years before. Of course, whenever they said George Best, I said to them, Maradona. Oh, he says Maradona. The universal language of football.
Could I just ask you, Belfast, thank you. Belfast is a relatively recent invention, really, isn't it? But the old language zones reached as far down as the Castlereagh Road not too long ago, because one of the finer poets who wrote My Lagan Love, Joseph Campbell, lived at the lower end of the Castlereagh Road and wrote in Ulster Scots as well as English. Can you define any differences in the city of Belfast between those areas that speak more of an Ulster Scots and those that don't in terms of Belfast English? Is there a difference, for example, between East Belfast and West Belfast?
Belfast is a twang as well. Not so sure about South. But the simple fact of the matter is all cities started out as small villages, and eventually people flooded in from the countryside and brought their accents, their tongues, their words, their phrases with them. So you'll find that I know Nelson McCausland is very fond of saying that when he conducts research on the Shankill Road, he can find somewhere between 100 and 200 words which are identifiable as Ulster Scots, but which people are just using in a Belfast context. So I think there's if we go back to what I was saying earlier, there's a wee pinch of Ulster Scots, I think, which informs the Belfast accent. But I think Belfast is a separate accent altogether. I mean, it's back to that point about language being a means of communication. It's about me getting an idea from my head to your head. Now, what that means in practice is that most people have to mediate their accent. It's one of the problems about Ulster Scots is it's slightly hidden. It's slightly hidden. People don't use it And I know Ian Parsley here has written very extensively about this, about the use of formal communications when you're dealing with authority. So that, I'm sure you've heard people talk about, oh, that's your telephone voice. And that happens. I mean, I remember James Fenton telling me a story. He was so fascinated with the difference between Belfast and his own home in Ballinalube that he got a big, giant, reel-to-reel tape recorder and brought it down to his father, and he was going to interrogate his dad and get a whole lot of words and phrases from him. The minute he put the microphone in front of him, he reverted in. Jim's father was a lay preacher, and Jim would tell you that his dad would be out in the car park talking as broad as anything. The minute he got into the gospel hall and started preaching, he reverted to as close to received pronunciation as a Northampton countryman was capable of doing, which is probably not that close at all, but it certainly wasn't broad Ulster Scots. He adopted the same accent when he put the microphone to him. And I've encountered that problem, I'm sure you have too, Laura, that you're talking to people who are fabulous talkers, fabulous accents. I have a simple solution for it. One, you hide the microphone. Two, you bring a bottle of famous grouse whiskey, and I promise you, tongues are loosened wonderfully with a wee bit of whiskey. The only downside is, I remember we'd got a great conversation going up somewhere in the outskirts between Lochgiel and Armoy. And a great guy called Eddie McFadden and a cousin of mine called Eamon McGarry. And Eddie told the most fantastic stories, but he'd get to the punchline and he would go, and the effer just grabbed the effing thing, and that was it all. I can't use that on the radio. He destroyed it all. The whiskey he'd obviously overdosed on the whiskey. But it's that notion about Ulster Scots being slightly hidden. And James Fenton's term, the Hamely tongue, is really to convey that. It's the way people spoke round their own hearths. When they got to the doctors or the school to talk to the teacher or wherever, they took on a more formal register and conveyed what they needed to talk about in as close to received pronunciation as they could get. But it's alive and well up in Ballymoney. You and I were up there not very long ago there, Ian. There's no shortage of Ulster Scots speakers in Ballymoney.